My name is Christina Kakaflikas. I'm the Director of Economic Growth, Culture, and Entrepreneurship for the City of Markham. I'd like to welcome you to Session 2 of the International Online Summit, Becoming Public Art. This exciting 9-week event is presented by the City of Markham in partnership with Art Plus Public Unlimited. I'd like to open the proceedings with a land acknowledgement. We begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We are grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. My role as director covers many areas. Markham is an award-winning municipality with more than 350,000 people. It's home to more than 650 headquartered companies and more than 1,500 high-tech companies. Markham is a leader at attracting foreign direct investment, and we are a globally minded community. Equally important to our economic development is our culture and heritage. Markham is Canada's most diverse community and is home to the Flato Markham Theatre, the Varley Art Gallery, the Markham Museum, and the Markham Public Art Program. In all the work that we do, whether it's economic development or culture, we are city builders, and the role of collaboration is crucial in getting any project off the ground, be that through leveraging resources, pooling expertise, and building partnerships. I therefore look forward to hearing more about collaboration in the field of contemporary public art. Now over to the co-curators of this event, my colleague Yan Wu, Public Art Curator for the City of Markham, and Rebecca Carbon of Art Plus Public Unlimited.
Thanks, Christina, and welcome everyone. Just give me a quick second. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yan Wu, Public Art Curator for the City of Markham, and thank you all for joining us today, especially everyone returning from our last session. Hope you enjoyed Ken Lam's talk as much as I did. And welcome to the new names on the attendee list. Hope you like the program we put together and that we will see you again in the coming weeks. As mentioned in last week's session, the idea of organizing this summit directly arises from the Markham Public Art Master Plan 2020 to 2024. At the time when we were about to bring it forward to the City Council for approval, we tried to strategize on how to raise awareness and the potential of the plan. And more importantly, figuring out the best practices to implement it. What are the models, how to move forward, especially for an emerging public art program like ours. Still in the process of developing infrastructures and the procedures. We thought, why not create an occasion to gather all the great working models in one place and study them together? Moreover, we want to hear everyone's voice along the production line, from artist to curator, planner to architect, designer to fabricator, creator to administrator. Someone pointed out to me after last week's session that I missed the conservator in this list. Of course, and I think the viewer as participants should be on the list too. Public art making is a collective effort that demands highly complex processes and negotiations. So as soon as the council approved our plan, we brought public art consultant Rebecca Carbon on board to design a summit together with us. It has been an absolutely wonderful experience. I said it last week and I'm going to say this again. Thank you, Rebecca, for your knowledge, passion, and determinacy, and above all, your firm belief in public art. Originally, the summit was supposed to be a 3-day in-person event back in June. Because of the COVID, we had to change it to today's format. We were a bit disappointed at the beginning, but now look at it. We're able to reach out to a global audience, a global community. Thanks to everyone for their warm feedback so far. Looking forward to more exchanges and discussions in the coming weeks. Before handing over to Rebecca to introduce today's session, I would like to say a few thank yous. Thanks to everyone at the City of Markham for making this summit happen, the amazing team at the Varley Art Gallery, and the great support from the team at Corporate Communication IT. Now over to my collaborator, Rebecca Carbon.
Thanks so much, Jan, and thanks, Christina, for your introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today from wherever you are. We're thrilled to be sharing the work of artists Jennifer Marman and Daniel Borins, architect James Khamsi of DCSK, who will be giving a presentation on their collaborative practice as it's developed over the past number of years. After the presentation, Jennifer, Daniel, and James will be joined by fabricators Steve Richards of Streamliner Fabrication and Stefan Pilipa from Punch Clock Metalworks. And they'll be with you today in conversation moderated by Edmonton Arts Council Executive Director David Turnbull. For this, our second session of Becoming Public Art, Collaborative Practices. I'm really looking forward to seeing the presentation, learning more about artists whose work I have become familiar with myself over the past, I would say, 15 or 16 years, and the different people that they have worked with in building their practice over that time. So a couple of housekeeping notes before I introduce our moderator. After the moderated conversation between panelists, we will have a Q&A from the audience. So please use the Q&A box that you'll see on your screen to input your questions. Jan and I, the Q&A box, sorry, is down at the bottom, sort of on to the right, but at the right part of the middle section for people who were, I guess, having trouble finding it last week. Jan and I will facilitate moving those questions over to David, who will be asking those questions of the panelists when we do open the floor for that part of the session, which is the last 15-20 minutes of the session today. Our session, as we've already mentioned, is the second in our 9-week program, and we're really excited about our lineup overall. So please make sure that you do join us for some or all of the following sessions, same time and place, which is 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we cover a range of topics relevant to contemporary public art practices from a range of perspectives, and all built on the premise of examination of public art through case studies and working models. So over the next 7 weeks after today, we'll cover a civic role for artists, art and urban planning, accessibility, placemaking, site specificity, temporary programming, and digital public art commissioning. So I'm going to paste the registration link for these programs into the chat once I hand over the mic so that you can kind of look more at the program that we've got unfolding over the next several weeks. So without further ado, I would like to introduce David Turnbull, Executive Director at Edmonton Arts Council. David has been with the Edmonton Arts Council since 2009. He holds a Master of Art Conservation degree from Queen's University and a BFA from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. The most rewarding part of his job is meeting artists and understanding the work that they do while thinking about how artists can build communities and bring people together. David, handing it over to you.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. I just want to clarify for everyone that's out there, the 119 participants, so I'm not the executive director of the Edmonton Arts Council. I'm simply the director of public art and conservation with the Edmonton Arts Council. Not quite there yet. Or maybe never, I don't know. I just wanted to, so I'm coming to you from Edmonton. Of course, we're in Treaty 6 territory, and this is the traditional meeting grounds and gathering place and the traveling routes of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have also marked these lands for centuries. I know that there was a comment about that the conservation aspect is missing from this, so I'll do what I can to represent the field with my conservation background and knowledge as we get into some of the questions around design and fabrication and materials and things like that. So I'll do my best. I'm really excited to be part of this today. I think that these sessions are so vital to the field, not just for artists who are emerging into the field of public art practice and the discipline of public art, but I think also for senior artists. I think that and fabricators and administrators and conservators and for curators, because the more that we can talk about some of the things that are considered in going into these projects, the better. They're extremely complex, and I think that that's why it's so important that a topic like today for the collaborative processes is so important. So without further ado, I'll be introducing the artists to you. So Jennifer Marman and Daniel Borins, they're an artist duo based in Toronto. Their work is in private collections and public institutions, including the National Gallery of Canada and the Art Gallery of Ontario. They also produce permanent and temporary public art with commissions in Canada and the United States. James Khamsi designs across a range of all scales, from urban master plans to furniture pieces. He's currently working in the UK, but has also worked in the US, Canada, and Europe. And they will be joined by their collaborative fabricators, Steve Richards, who his company is Streamliner Fabrication Inc. in Toronto. And he has established an international reputation in the design and arts community for bringing an extraordinary skill set and craft to public art projects. And finally, we have Stefan Pilipa, who is the president and lead fabricator at Punch Clock Metalworks in Toronto. I had the opportunity to kind of meet everyone for the first time yesterday as we did an introduction and dry run. And I'm really excited about the conversation that's going to happen today, because I think that the relationship that these artists and architect and fabricators have is actually quite unique. So I'm really excited for everyone to get an opportunity to hear about how they work, and also have some takeaways for your own practices out there in the public on what it takes. I think this is kind of borrowing off of the heels of Ken's talk last week of how many different things it takes to actually be able to be a successful public artist in the world these days. So with that, I'd like to hand that over to Jennifer and Daniel and James to give us a presentation, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to the City of Markham. I'm going to set things up, and then Jennifer will speak, James, I will speak, and then Stefan and Steve will speak. So it's quite an order of things, and I'll be running the slideshow, going to share screen, and just that application, going to view full screen. Okay, so the title for our presentation is Elaboration on Collaboration and Fabrication, which we thought sounded nice, on the complexities of making public art and multi-stakeholder projects. Just a brief word about us, almost like philosophically. Creating vital places within the city isn't a task for compartmentalized specialists. It's best achieved by cross-disciplinary teams that understand how to combine the social and the cultural in a larger ecology. We want to point out that Steve Richards and Stefan Pilipa are fabricators and visual artists, and that they've both established an international reputation for their fabrication. We're going to talk about 3 projects: the Water Guardians, SFC Bridge, and Rite of Passage, Willingdon Linear Greenway. We'll discuss collaboration as a working method to design public projects that feature site responsiveness, integrated practice, and multidisciplinary approaches. We're also going to discuss, kind of in a suggestive way, touchstones of theory pertaining to public art, the collective process involved in conceiving of and executing projects, and the pushing of boundaries of what is possible. While reviewing 3 projects, these ideas will come up in a concise manner. So you're going to get quite an encapsulation. Then, of course, Stefan and Steve will follow up toward the end.
So this is great. We're going to start with a project called the Water Guardians. And to begin with, some questions that apply to this project. Questions like, what is a non-space and how is it made into a place? What is a cohesive plan? How can a site be made social? Can it express an ecology? And can it be art all at the same time? So picture this site. It's the post-industrial Dawnlands. As you can see, extremely barren, inhospitable, really a non-space. And this wasn't too long ago. This was maybe 2005. And this area was in transition for a long time. At one point, it was the proposed Taratiri development. But this area was a real political football. Even in the 70s and 80s, some thought industry might return, and successive governments, luckily, planned for a mixed-use development and remediation of the Don River. This is an overhead view that shows the position of our site in location to the surroundings. To the east, you see Courttown Common Park, and then a little further east, you see the Don Valley Parkway and the Don River. Looking westward, in the image to the left, is the density of downtown Toronto. And then the close-up overhead image shows our site with new mid-rises being built, so the neighborhood is growing. And here you see the Water Guardians. It's a gateway project between the Don Valley and downtown Toronto. So what were we thinking about in the design of this project? Things like play and active participation, how to make a site responsive. We wanted to create an outdoor living room, be welcoming to all ages, and really a symbol for all people. We also wanted to acknowledge the proximity and importance of the Don River adjacent to this site. And some personal history, Daniel's grandmother used to picnic by and swim in the Don River in the early decades of the 20th century. Since then, the river was contaminated with industrial pollution. Luckily, it's being remediated. We thought it was a good idea to make a work about protecting our environment and our waterways. The project was commissioned in 2012, completed in 2015. It was commissioned by Waterfront Toronto, and we had the pleasure of working very closely with Rebecca Carbon, who was Public Art Project Manager at Waterfront Toronto. And she was responsible for the creation of a public art master plan for the area, a real initiative in integrated thinking about public art. Our development timeline coincided with the site build and the project debuted for the Para-Pan Am Games. So the RFP for this project called for a living room and a child-friendly zone in this neighborhood. We worked with PFS, the landscape architect, to integrate the project within the larger landscape and really maximize the impact. The three figures you see stand as personifications of water. They're also sentinels and guardians of the waterways of Toronto. Standing guard over the area, they form an archway, a riverway, their eyes laid up at night, so they're a beacon protecting the neighborhood. Here you see water is created through wavy lines in the ground plane. There are green mounds. You can sit, stand, or play on them. And the figures themselves form an archway that can be walked through, creating an interactive social space. So how did we get there? In the beginning, we investigated playful cartoon ideas, characterizations, geometries, so lots of studies. We also looked at classical examples. We debated amongst the three of us how to find the right forms, how to create a meaningful setting. We were also influenced by the rehabilitation of de Soubreau's No Shoes sculpture nearby and the rehabilitation of the Don River itself. We focused on modernism and how it could be commented on socially, and the form began to take shape, the creation of a gateway. What does it take to build this project. Here's some engineering drawings. The sculpture is quite two-dimensional in nature, suggesting cutouts, a child's game, but it needed structural strengthening in its design. So from two-dimensional to three-dimensional, fabricated in steel, it's comprised of a box form with returns and internal structure that allow for rigidity, has a two-part epoxy coating, and you can see the fabricator Steve Richards down in the right-hand corner.
Hi, Steve.
Foundations were built as the site was being developed. Pavers were installed, lighting channels, electrical. The sculpture arrived in pieces, although they were still pretty big pieces. Parts were raised in place by convenient holes, the eyes. A landscape of green hills was made off-site. Electrical was connected, hooked up, then rubber surfacing was installed. Here you see the completed water guardians serving as a gateway between the Don River and downtown Toronto. You can see the CN Tower peeking behind one of the figures. And the public reception to this project, we've been very happy. It's been very positive. We think this is because, first of all, a non-space was turned into a place, and a place with a broad social appeal. The balance of friendliness with the severity of the gaze, it really disrupted what sculpture can do and the traditional role of sculpture. The work refers to autonomous sculpture such as no shoes, but it updates with the contemporary desire for social message and social use. So simultaneously, it situates the living street and gateway as must-haves for Toronto, something the city really needs. Here you can see at night, lighting really animates the site. So lighting of the sculpture and the ground plane make the sculpture stand out in a very dramatic way, makes it highly visible from a distance. And more importantly, the water guardians with their illuminated eyes watch over and protect the site. So in closing, the water guardians really pays tribute to our environment and our waterways and guards over them. The figures watch out for us as they welcome us. Water and waterways serve as a path towards social relevance. This is done in a tone that is both playful and interactive. Now I'm going to hand things over to James.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. I'd also like to thank Jan and Rebecca, and very excited to chat with everyone on the panel, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in today. I'm going to be discussing our project called the SFC Bridge, which is in Toronto and was completed in 2015. Next slide. So just to be clear, what you see here, the bridge, is in fact entirely the public art piece. And it is also an infrastructure for pedestrian mobility in the city. So it's both infrastructure and art at once. Slide. For us, it was the first time we delivered public art within the context of a large urban real estate development and a kind of significant major construction project. The next one, yes. It's also important to note that it's part of Toronto's PATH network. Those of you who aren't from Toronto, the PATH is a connective system of privately owned public spaces that weaves through downtown. And so I just kind of realized something today was that this isn't just a piece of art within a public space, it's also a public space within a piece of art. So there's a kind of interesting multiple layers of publicness involved in it. Next slide. We saw it as an opportunity to bring a new kind of visual experience to this infrastructure that's part of everyday life in Toronto. And as we talk through it, I'll also explain how we developed our concept and some of the kind of, let's say, formal language we were working with that played with the regular and the irregular. Can we go forward?
Are you frozen?
Am I frozen?
No, no.
Okay.
Okay. Are we looking at the site plan?
Site
This
plan.
one?
Okay. Well, look, we'll just go through this. Just to situate you, this is where our project is. To the north is downtown Toronto. At the bottom of the image, you can see Lake Ontario. It's in a zone between the elevated rail tracks that go into Union Station and the elevated Gardiner Expressway.
So are we freezing? Or...
James is frozen.
Okay. I think I need to hear a message from where are we? Are we frozen completely? Are we gone?
I don't know. We seem to be gone.
Daniel and Jennifer, you are not frozen. We can
Okay.
hear you and see you.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So I
maybe
don't know.
maybe James will log on again. Sorry, we just stopped being able to see ourselves. So, okay, we'll continue. So James was just talking about the infrastructure, and then this is an enlargement of the site. So a former piece of crossing over the train tracks, and the smaller item here is the SFC bridge, and then you see it in the bottom left-hand corner. So, you know, we say with like a little bit of a dose of humor that Toronto has had a poor relationship with people. What we mean is that the individual person and their mobility. It has historically been difficult to walk from the business district over here south to the lake that you previously saw. Simcoe Street ended at the train tracks, which is over here, but then was built later on, so in the last 7 years. Pedestrian bridges in Toronto, because it's a cold weather climate and because infrastructure is in the way, help improve pedestrian mobility. Pedestrian bridges can be design features rather than utilitarian non-design afterthoughts. So since SFC Bridge, there has been more focus paid to architecture and design of pedestrian mobility through bridges in Toronto. The commission competition began in around 2012, but it took 2 iterations of design. The competition call asked for us to conceive of the shape, envelope, and interior program of a pedestrian bridge addition to the path network connecting the Delta Hotel Tower to the convention center. Here's the Delta Hotel, just a little piece of it, and the convention center here. It involved many stakeholders in real estate, pension funds, the convention center, the hotel, city planning, and many levels of transportation agencies. James, if you're back with us.
I'm back. Crisis solved. The project had a rather unusual brief. Here's the plan that you're looking at. And as you can see, the bridge takes a 120-degree turn. This was mandated because of its proximity to the rail lines and some underground infrastructure that runs beneath it. It lands on a structural pier, which you can see in the lower left. And it also slopes from right to left by about 2 meters. So this really is a bridge without any straight lines. Should go to the next one. And we really saw in this kind of unruly collection of diagonal lines an opportunity to craft a unique formal language, and not only that spoke to the geometry of the bridge itself, but through its programming on the interior and the exterior could refer to the site and create its own experience. And next slide. These are some of our preliminary studies where you can see early iterations of the design and its language. Certain motifs begin to emerge, the use of distorted patterns, zigzags, and wrapping. And next slide. On the left are 2 photographs of the completed bridge, and on the right are some of our design study drawings. So the exterior is defined by these 2 bands of dark aluminum panels that wrap around. They follow the geometry of the trusses and tie together the vertical surface, the walls, the underside of the bridge, which is very visible, and then the backside. For us, this idea of expressing wrapping and binding was a way to allude to the role this bridge was playing in tying together the very fragmented pedestrian realm on site. And then next slide. And then in contrast to this, these are images of the interior. Again, 2 photographs of the final interior space as built on the left, and then some of our design studies on the right. So inside, a continuous hand-painted but digitally conceived mural extends across the walls, onto the ceiling, and back down onto the other wall. It creates a counter-programming to the exposed steel trusses, so you can see the white trusses weaving through it. And it really plays with your perception of the space when you're within the boundaries of the bridge. As one moves through the space, the mural distorts and reframes perspectives and creates a quite dynamic visual experience. And next slide. And here you can see 2 details, one of the interior and one of the exterior. We put a lot of care and attention into the detailing of the project. So looking very specifically at, for example, how the window frames met with the structural truss, and how the aluminum panels would be bent and folded as they wrapped around the corners of the bridge, so that you wouldn't have seams or kind of exposed lines. Next slide. And obviously, as its site was literally hovering over an active road, it was a challenging construction project. And these are some images of that process. On the upper right was, that photograph was taken the day the steel trusses, which were prefabricated off-site near the CNE, were brought to site and craned into place all in one go. And then on the bottom, you can see images of how the rest of the materiality was assembled, sometimes from the inside, sometimes from the outside on cherry pickers. Next slide. And then these are photographs of the final, of the bridge as constructed. For us, the bend, the moment where the bridge kind of takes its turn, was a really special moment. It's not every day you get to design a bridge that does this. So we really want to celebrate that. So here you can see the triangular window, which is sited at the corner and wraps around it, creating this amazing framed view out from when you're inside through this very unique shape. Next slide. So the bridge was completed in 2015. And shortly afterwards, we began to notice it popping up quite frequently on Instagram. And it was quite a moment of realization for us, because you start to realize that now public art doesn't just exist within its site, but it can participate in numerous public spheres. And it gave us a way to understand how people were engaging with the space, what drew them in. These are a couple of our favorites, really special moments where you can see people jumping and positioning and styling their bodies almost as though they're participating with the mural. And for us, this was very cool to see, because you don't really see behavior like this within the Path network regularly. It's kind of a, it's kind of a corporate downtown space. So that you see young people coming in, engaging with it. It's a very different vibe and atmosphere. And then next slide. And then this is one final shot, again, of the exterior looking up from Lower Simcoe. And you can see the way the bridge itself kind of becomes part of the iconic language of the skyline of the city. Great, so now I'm going to hand it back to Daniel, who's going to take us through the rite of passage.
Okay, so thank you, James. And we are going to be, or I'm going to be presenting on rite of passage, Willingdon Linear Park in Burnaby, British Columbia. So we just, like we started with the Water Guardians, asked some questions. Can we create transitional spaces that belong to everyone? How can public art situate an ecology, make new landmarks, and express locale in narrative? Looking here on the right side, you see a segment of a 1.2 kilometer linear park. The rite of passage Willingdon Linear Park was completed in 2018 and commissioned by the City of Burnaby Department of Parks and Cultural Services in Burnaby, BC. We were responding to the existing site conditions of a large site. So this was new for us, 1.2 kilometers of consideration, a linear park, a greenway, and working with ISL landscape design in Burnaby or the Vancouver area. We sought to develop a family of forms within a geographic context and the context of a changing city toward a theme of passageways. Prior to the construction of the linear park and the installation of rite of passage, Willingdon Avenue was an inhospitable arterial roadway. This land had actually been acquired for road widening. Socially, the understanding was that road widening is not the solution for cities, and if anything, different forms of mobility were necessary, one friendly to the pedestrian or bicyclists. So what the site really looks like is mountainous and rolling hills, very green, very British Columbia. And that larger context, so Burnaby is here, is within the Fraser River Delta. So islands and rivers flowing through the greater Vancouver area. We started to establish a family of forms. Braided and woven became the language that we started to discuss. So deltas and weaving and caning and geometries came to mind. The project involves 19 distinct art elements. We thought of the entire site as a significant connector and a way of moving through the area differently. Public art as a force for change. Themes and names arose. Terms like the passage, the eddy, the delta, inspired form as fluvial and woven. Integrating with the landscape themes of braiding and weaving, the project celebrates Burnaby's setting within a watershed, a river delta, and a city in transition. It's difficult to present all in one presentation and will be a little bit shorter on some of the elements, but the artistic program involves over 400 meters of art screens with 6 beacons and integrated sculpture in 2 parks, involving 3 different fabricators, 2 that are with us today. The art screens and beacons, they can be gateway beacons, they can have major introductory ones. This is one of the introductory themes. Gateway beacons mark the park at the north and south entrances, and 4 additional beacons identify bus stops that dot the linear park. Fluvial forms and topography expressed through wave motif fins, while a weave motif of overlapping geometry speaks to urban dynamics and to the delta of islands and tributaries that weave through the greater Vancouver area. The screens and beacons are boldly colored. They go through a color scheme that varies from cool to warm hues, here an aquatic style at the other entrance. The color language alludes to the shades of the surrounding landscape and expresses the atmospheric light intensities of the ocean sun and northern Pacific coastal weather patterns. Some detail shots of some of the main beacons and how some of the smaller ones coincide with bus stops, and then a finer detail of some of the overlapping. Two major parks are associated with the project. There we installed and designed placemaking social sculptures. Formal language such as the passage, the confluence, the eddy, and the delta are made into sculptural forms. One setting as a social connection and the second as a place of calm. Here is the eddy. Based on swirling river eddies, the sculpture's centrifugal form can be physically and socially interacted with. Residents of the new towers nearby have a place to connect with. In terms of materials, we worked with metal, paint, mixed media, stone, rubber. The project took 2 years of development time. We collaborated with ISL on the integration of the parks within their landscape plan. Multiple stakeholder presentations and studies were shared because of the range of bureaus and offices across the municipality of Burnaby. And as I said, 3 fabricator teams were involved. So Steve Richards, Stefan Pilipa, and Eventscape in Toronto, working on the 400 meters of art screen. The eddy is an undulating steel structure that is at once a hammock, a play structure, and a social hub. The netting of the sculpture ties into the interwoven art screen that you saw in the backdrop that wraps around the pocket park and matches its form. The sculpture reinforces social cohesiveness, narrative, and interaction. People can gather on it, around it, and immerse themselves in a blue swirling eddy in this abstracted concentric theme. The concentric circular waveforms of the blue rubber surfaces are punctuated by the wavy, undulating forms of the sculpture. Woven rope in the sculpture is echoed by an interwoven art screen containing mountain peaks. So here, like the peaks we opened with. How did we get there? We started with the most basic of sketches and had ideas about social space and geometry in a suite of forms. So not a monolithic or single footing. Ideas about weaving and geometry were forming, a notion of water and its forms. We also started thinking about a larger setting of screens and backdrops at the same time that would connect and punctuate the linear park. Through study and more study, ideas about a community hammock started to take form. We went from hammock to a centrifugal social sculpture balanced on arching cantilevered legs. This was a form-finding exercise. Once we found the form, we were ready to work with Stefan and engineers on technical drawings. So this drawing, leaving our studio, turning into fabrication drawings that Stefan Pilipa of Punch Clock produced. It was a long form-finding, method-finding project. The metalwork had to be precise, and the rope weaving even more so. The rope had to fulfill safety requirements. Weaving patterns took 2 months through digital drawings, templates, test fits, and refinements. We would test something in analog, send James the results, and then run scripts in Rhino to determine the weaving pattern. The weaving is not just one consistent set of connections. It also involves, I don't know, some 4D thinking. We chose colors, design templates for the rubber to be installed, and had to plan and coordinate the site build, along with the sculpture install. Once the sculpture was installed, the final rubber could be put in place. So from drawings in the studio and color to working on the site, laying down the templates to almost there to an install, and then that would be filled in after. So we thought that we're really serving communities, within tributaries and islands, all down to this little fella here in the eddy. So we're almost through, but they're going to take you along the trail. It is hospitable to bicyclists and pedestrians, involves old growth aspects of trees that have existed there, and also new plantings. So this would pop up from the distance. We're at the Delta now, the other pocket park. The Greater Vancouver area is situated within rivers and mountains. We designed a place of calm that would honor these landforms and sculpt rivers into the sky. Here, set against a soft art screen backdrop, not as loud as the other colors, more misty. We thought of this as a misty place. The materials used are metal, paint, stone, mechanical, fountain design, lighting. The coordination and design was a complex balance of concrete formwork, wet deck, drainage element made out of metal, crafted stainless steel boulders, and white tubular rivers as sculptural fountains. So they pour water out of them. We worked with Steve and Stefan and designer Dan User of water architecture. The description, this area is a place of atmosphere, rest, and calm. The sculptural water feature ascends into a welcoming embrace. So it literally turns the delta into a vertical. The delta creates a visual and oral screen for the park, calming and replacing the sights and sounds of traffic with cascading water. The sculpture's white tubes resemble river tributaries as water flows from them onto shimmering and faceted stainless steel rock-like forms. The sculptural form takes inspiration from the Fraser River watershed. Most of our design intent was based on establishing an homage to the natural setting of the Fraser Delta in sculpture. We wanted the forms to look transcendent, yet to be new, odd, and different at the same time. So an unusual layout or style or format, very multifaceted. Here too, we started with basic sketches and had ideas about geography and a majestic setting. The design developed through several iterations, far more drawings than here. But from the beginning, we always had the idea of river paths and a resting place as a constant. It was just that we didn't quite know how we were going to set it. So here was almost like a baseball diamond with like seating around it, but then it became much more refined as a disc that it was positioned in. No easy task, Stefan will get into it, but coordinating all the shapes of the tubes within this wet deck, which is drainage and has these primordial crawling kind of pattern, or perhaps water. The fabrication process was multifaceted. Dan User designed custom nozzles and the pumps system, and Stefan built the tubes and worked on the wet deck. Steve Richards crafted the stainless steel faceted boulders. From drawings out of Stefan's shop, like pump systems and nozzle systems and connections, everything is housed inside the white tubes. To the complexities of laying down the wet deck and having all the parts need to fit within relatively perfect tolerance. Here you can get an idea of just how chaotic the install was. And here you see James Khamsi inspecting. From that to a huge party, a great reception from the city of Burnaby, and wonderful to see kids interacting with the sculpture. And now we're coming to the end of the Delta presentation. I just wrote a kind of poem. Potentially transcendental, certainly flowing and temporal, transitional yet permanent, definitely working in teams toward the spirit of collaboration. Thank you. So that concludes the presentation, and hopefully we're going to be able to tune in Steve and Stefan. Do we have Steve?
Yes, there's Steve.
Excellent.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Hi, everyone. There you have the projects. Thank you, Jennifer and Daniel and James for showing us those things. I guess I'll bring it back to collaboration, which I think is one of the things we wanted to touch on with this, and what the role of the fabricator is working with the artists to ultimately realize their projects. So I guess I'll probably bounce back and forth to Stefan here on what that process looks like. So as you can imagine, at some point, the artists and designers working on their own decide to bring it to the fabricators to get a sense of what's possible within the parameters of the project, and to get some feedback on the early designs of what they're proposing, to see number one what our ideas are on the details of fabrication, the general feasibility of it within, well, mostly within the laws of physics and engineering and budget. So that's the first stage, is we sit down and we give feedback on the early designs. Maybe Stefan you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think, from my own perspective, I think that very early in the process, there's an internal decision-making process about whether or not our skills and our experiences are going to really help bring the thing to life. And I think personally, probably you Steve too, probably feel this way as well. But I always look for something in the project that I personally can bring to it, but also, and in some ways a selfish way, something that I can get out of it, in the sense a new experience, getting to travel, getting to explore a new process, and getting to, kind of prove your worth and prove your value as a fabricator or as a craftsman or as a technician. Because in the end, it makes me feel good. It feels good to be part of a process that, something beautiful comes out of the end of. And it definitely feels good to know that you played a really important role, not the only role, but like a huge role in making something happen. So for me, in terms of the collaborative process and working with Jennifer and Daniel and James, it's been very rewarding. And I thank all of you guys for always including me in these projects or asking me my opinion, and that's some of the decision making and some of the more personal feelings around working collaboratively, guys.
And more so with a lot of other art forms, working in sculpture on this scale, the artist has to have a really high level of trust with the people that are actually putting together their work, like creating their work. On a small scale, you can fabricate something yourself in your shop as an artist, but when they expand onto these larger scales, we have to rely on fabricators, and even myself, I have sub fabricators and suppliers. So it has to be like a greater community that kind of gets on board with the intent of the project overall, and then specifically the intent of the details to keep it on track to produce what the artist's intent is. without having too much interference with that. And that's where it gets interesting for guys like me and Stefan, is to come up with creative solutions to keep the project on track.
Yeah, I think for me also, I think in early conversations that have happened when we're dealing with potential public art project, there is this moment, and I think maybe everybody watching too understands this sort of at a tutor level, where we have to look at what the budget for the project is and what the scope and scale and sort of how ambitious the project is, and find some way to make the two things match. And I think Steve is quite good at making that happen. And I think I'm learning, and I'm still trying to figure out how to make it happen. But it is a really fun, and it is a really interesting and intriguing process of figuring out how to give the artist exactly what the artist wants, plus more, for whatever small or not enough money that is available to actually produce the project. So for me, that process of figuring it all out is the funnest, is really the funnest part of it.
And just in general with art competitions, the greatest thing wins. The most interesting and the coolest and probably the most difficult thing to achieve for the budget, often gets chosen. So right from the beginning, we have a bit of, we've got a really tough bar to meet to get all those things lined up. So especially with artists that really push the limits of of design and just what can be done, period, in these things. And it's fun to work with artists and designers that do that, but it's also really challenging. So I don't know if you want us to talk about what the process looks like a little bit, like just touch on it, or
share a little bit of how you made this.
Okay, let's go back.
Steel.
Yeah, please.
To which, sorry, Daniel?
The stainless steel rocks.
Oh, the rocks. Okay, the rocks are a great example of that. So we were bouncing around different ideas of the fountain. Jennifer and Daniel and James, I got presented just some rough sketches of what you think might be possible with the steel forms and the pipes and things like that, just on a general level. And we were talking about what we would need to support big granite rocks, and whether or not we could do something else. And the idea came up that maybe we could build these things out of metal and make some stainless steel rocks, and that would be interesting. So we did some sampling of what the surface would be, and kind of developed a language with what that would look like. And then Jennifer and Daniel they came up with base forms that they were working with in their designs, and I kind of mimicked little pieces of it in some samples. And then they kind of let me make them with their dropping in and their supervision. And we had a dialogue while I was fabricating those on where the exact shape would be. So they didn't design it 100% completely. The set of blueprints arrived that I worked from. We had a very interactive process while those were being made. And I think it took it to, brought them something that initially we might not have expected. And that collaborative process gave us something that neither one of us had exactly envisioned at the beginning of that.
And Stefan, thanks, Steve. And Stefan, what about all of these different parts and fitting them together? Just explain, I guess, these radius takeoffs here.
Sure. Why don't you slip back to page 99 with the plan view of the decking there?
Mm-hmm.
And then, I'm sorry,
So-
we will need to move it along because we
Okay.
just make sure that we get to some Q&A as well. So I think once we've gone through this, we're going to switch to a different conversation, if that's all right with everyone.
Well, just very quickly then, I would say that one of the things that from a fabrication point of view that's really crucial is the installation part of it. So there is the elements of the tubes, there's elements of the decking, the elements of the rocks, plus the elements of the landscape concrete surrounding. All of those elements have to come together and look absolutely perfect. If you look down on the right corner where it says the revision of this particular drawing, it says revision 6.5. I don't think that was the last revision. I think those drawings went through many, many different revisions. And from a fabrication perspective, in collaboration with the artist, the other thing that has to be talked about is it possible to put the pieces together? Is it possible to put the pieces together without destroying or scratching it? Is it also possible to put the pieces together so that they could also be taken apart later, which they always have to if there's an adjustment or if something goes wrong or something is damaged? So just for people who are interested, nerds, I suppose, who are interested in how the sausage is made and all the nitty gritty, there is a lot of thought and time put into where screws are put, where seams are put, what the tolerances are. And in this particular case, for that particular project, there was only a millimeter or two of space left when we were done, when all the different elements were put together, simply because the surroundings and all of the connections did not allow for any deviation.
Well, and if I can just jump in, I mean, I am a total nerd, so this is the stuff that really interests me. I've jotted down about 5 or 6 pages of foolscap questions as you were all going through your presentations and talking just now. So I really want to ask about, so there's questions about installation, there's questions around words like trust, collaboration, what that looks like. I think, determining within the relationship where the lines of distinction are drawn. And then there's also questions around, things like the changing face of public art. Earlier in your presentation, and we discussed this briefly yesterday, that, public art is changing quite a bit. It's not so much about the thing on a plinth or the thing put onto a site. It's much more of an integrated process now. And how important is it? Because the expectations that are now being put on the artists and the design teams from when the calls go out are so much higher. So the artists have to be everything to everyone when they sign the contract. They have to produce good art. They have to create something that's site responsive. They have to be community builders. They have to fix poor planning. And they can't do everything. So, I wanted to talk about, through some of these projects, like through the SFC bridge, where it really treads that line between art and architecture to be able to achieve a broader goal, and how important it is to have different approaches to thinking. Whereas one artist or artist group might just look at doing an application onto some windows or put some things scattered throughout, your approach was quite different. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what that process looked like, that relationship, Jennifer and Daniel and James to come up with those various approaches.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot in that question. So we'll go to the first part. And then sort of more onto the bridge. And then that'll allow Jennifer and James to cue it up. But we would say, yes, the role of the public artist is moving away from studio and then studio enlargement of something that then is made at the foundry, let's say, or at a fabricator. It is a collaborative process, and artists are expected to understand the public realm, be urbanists, understand design, understand architects, and also work within contingencies. So the autonomous work is playing less of a role now, and the artist is expected to understand art and social practice, civic arts, placemaking, creative placemaking, and community planning, community arts, and to be inclusive and understand engagement, as well as all of the previous aspects, which are fine arts, institutional practice, museum practice, have an art practice, and have to do this within the context of site, social value, social or use value, history, geography, an understanding of the public, identities, lived space, balance of nature, and to not necessarily work on an art project as an isolation. So that's answering to, it's becoming like an increased amount of expectation on the artists working in this context.
And then you have to be able to build it and have it last.
Yes.
On top of that, right?
Yes. So, so then what is interesting, and maybe James can speak to this, because I think this is not entirely fair, but we said that there's some kind of a difference in the way public infrastructure, essentially, let's just leave it at Toronto, and the idea of a bridge or a pedestrian space, that there is some realization that changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you want me to pick up on that?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think amongst the bridges of Toronto, ours is still unique in its form and in its experience. Most of the bridges you see that are part of the Path Network, they're simply treated as extensions of the building that they plug into. So they kind of, it's the same corporate architecture language, the same materiality, and they're really kind of like extensions of a lobby, more than meant to find an engagement with the public or be a kind of unique experience in their own right. So I think that's what would distinguish our bridge. In terms of delivery, though, the interesting thing about the bridge is that is probably the most architectural in its delivery of any of our projects. It was built by a general contractor. It was working with kind of subs that would build buildings, not fabricators like Stefan. So, yeah, it's a kind of a very different experience to, for example, a project in Burnaby, the Rite of Passage, which was completely, I think, unique in the way we cobbled together the fabricator teams, and it required us all to be much more dynamic and much more collaborative than the bridge.
Yeah, I am curious about, the fluidity of your relationship within this collaborative process, and then as well with Steve and Stefan as well, because when we look at a project like the rites of passage, the Delta, there's quite a bit of back and forth. It seems it's not just here's what we want to create, here's what our end vision looks like, you guys go and make it. There's quite a bit of back and forth happening, and seems to be a lot of trust and responsibility to one another in order to be able to achieve this common vision. But I'm wondering, in the end, because we know how public art commissioning happens, there are contracts involved. Who ultimately is the boss? And how do you hold one another accountable? right? And how do you work within a project where everyone may have different approaches to how they would carry out the project or envision the project? Who gets everyone on board?
Jennifer does. Probably keeps everybody together.
The artist has the contract with the client, so ultimately the responsibility is ours. But then when we're working with other people, it is, you know, a team effort. And something like the Delta, because it was an artwork, but it was a water feature and it involved landscape design, our team expanded. So Steve mentioned that he has people he goes to when he needs something that he doesn't do in his shop. So does Stefan, so do we. So we weren't working with just Stefan and Steve. We had to team up with a water specialist who does water features. We needed a landscape contractor to install that mechanical and install a basin. And then as Stefan pointed to, the coordination was extremely important, because if the basin was not the exactly correct size, then the beautiful wet deck that Stefan fabricated in his shop would not fit. So at a point, with a project like that, part of our role is making sure there is the proper level of communication between all team members, but we want to make sure that we don't involve the fabricator in discussions and exercises that take up their valuable time and aren't warranted. So we're really trying to coordinate and facilitate the fabrication and make sure that all team members are working towards the common goal.
I could talk about, like, I could answer it so many different ways, but Jennifer definitely has been the boss more of the most of the projects. And then could also say that the relationships are quite long right now. So we started with the project, I think, with Rebecca, our first commission was 2007 for the TTC.
And City of Toronto.
But that's been, and City of Toronto, but that's been delayed so many times that it's still not installed yet, and will most likely get installed this spring. And that would be with Steve Richards. Steve Richards went to, he was a student at OCA. OCA had a shop culture. And I think we all come a little bit from a shop culture of building interest in materials. Material culture is not quite the right term, but an interest in materiality and making things, and some kind of scale and ambition. So Steve would really like Chris Burden as an artist that could potentially be influential. And then with Stefan, we met him, I think it's like 6 or 7 years ago now, but I don't know if this is fair to say, but let's just say we were among the first projects out of when Punch Clock became a unified entity and its own standalone production facility. So the relationships are long, and the communications are it's like quite involved.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that is seems to me that's fairly unique in working with Steve and Stefan and yourselves, is that the that this is a long-standing relationship. It's not something where you would go to like a large firm that will do everything from beginning to end. And so yesterday we talked briefly about, how do you bill for things like that? How do you set budgets? How do you set prices, right? And when you're do you bill by the minute? Do you bill by the hour? Every time that you have to have a conversation or a back and forth, right? How do you cover yourselves?
It's just,
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to comment a little bit on that. Within Punch Clock, we do have a sort of unwritten policy that if new and emerging artists come to us and they do not have the budget that they need to bring their piece to fruition, we will find a way to make it happen for them, with the understanding that we're contributing to something larger. We're contributing something to larger than just their career as an artist, because those artists are contributing something larger than themselves. They're contributing to the public sphere. And we feel, as you know, as a welder, as a grinder, as a fabricator, I feel like it's my responsibility to do what I can to make that happen. As a business model, it helps also because the artists that do succeed and become more successful and get larger projects will feel compelled to come back to us and use us again in the future. So it works out well.
Now, when it comes to working with like emerging artists, for instance, and this is for both Steve and Stefan again, and because I'm a conservator, I've got to ask this question. When it comes to expertise on materials and recommendations to artists, and we look at engineering, we look at the long-term lifespan of the artwork, if there's a limited budget involved. How are those conversations had, and are there compromises that then have to be made that might affect longevity? And then once we're done with this question, we're going to have to go to some of the questions that have been sent in through the chat. So Steve and Stefan, I'll leave that to you.
Well, it's one of the first things that I look for is the appropriateness of material to the task. Whether or not it's an achievable engineering prospect. I mean, much of what Stefan and I do is propose initial engineering solutions to our engineering team to see if it can be done. And yeah, always make material suggestions and finish suggestions, especially that might be more appropriate or cost effective. With the eye, I mean, things have to last. They have to last a certain amount of time for certain. Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know an answer, I can call Steve. If I don't have if I don't really know, I do research. But in the end, when it comes time to build it, you know, we want it to last forever. And so, you know, I think Steve probably shares this as well. If we're going to take a hit in terms of economically to make something last forever, we will, because our name or our reputations are associated with it, and our clients' names are associated with it. So we have to, and I think we sort of bring those values to that. So stainless steel instead of steel, high-grade paints instead of not, extra time and thought put into how it's going to be installed and how it's going to be protected and how it's going to be fixed when it does eventually get, you know, vandalized or scratched or whatnot. Those are the things that we bring.
Okay.
I saw a question just come up just saying, how do you define collaboration? I'll just quickly say that it's trust and a relationship built around trust. I mean, we all have to trust that each one of us will do what the project needs, and we're all on the same team. That's collaboration, and there's no lines in the sand that we stick to. We all cross the lines to propel the job forward. So that's what collaboration means to me in this.
I would add to that really quickly, compromise, and in a way struggle as well. You know, just because you're collaborating doesn't mean you're not also fighting and disagreeing. You are, and arguing and negotiating and trying to find the best solution. I don't think people should be afraid of that. And also, I think really important point for me is that the whole collaborative process allows individuals to show an individual genius that would not exist without that collaborative process being there. I am not a very smart person, but as soon as I get into a room with Steve and Daniel and Jennifer, suddenly my intelligence level goes way off the charts, because there's a secret sauce in the process that makes it work, and that's what I'm interested in.
Huh. That's nice. That's a nice thought.
Yeah.
We would say that, you know, it can be maybe we're just peculiar, or collaboration has changed in art and public art in general, just because so many more stakeholders are involved now, and because some fields have started to cross over. So architecture into art, or art into architecture, industrial design, fabrication. We have, with Jennifer, James, and I, we have collective interests in research and development. We have common interests. We research things together. And we think it's been quite a natural process. Ideas are developed. I think James has been an influence in terms of charrettes, how ideas are fielded, willingness to do iteration after iteration. And the same thing pertains to Steve and Stefan. I don't quite know, like they kind of just exist in a vacuum because they didn't apprentice for another fabricator. So that's kind of an interesting way. They just, like, you know, information just developed through, I guess, through practicing fabrication.
And a question from the audience is around engineering. And I'm always curious about this myself. You know, at what stage does the engineering team come in? At what stage of production do you consult the engineering team, and what kind of a relationship are you expected to have with an engineering team as an artist? And I think part of this is because, at least with my experience with public art and watching it be made, is that often there are significant compromises and changes that have to happen because of engineering requirements. And so I'm curious about where that comes in, and are those ever at odds, or is that a pretty smooth process?
But it's why we work with fabricators like Steve and Stefan, because usually they come up with the engineering solutions before even talking with an engineer. So it's much easier for them to strategize and figure out a best method. And then the engineer doesn't say no right away. They see that someone's thought it out. There is a way to do this. They can give feedback instead of proposing their own ideas from the start.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So most engineers I work with, they like a starting point to do with the work they do. So I think that's a good start for a fabricator to propose something as a starting point.
Yeah, if somebody was asking, you know, should the engineer be contacted first or the fabricator first, I would say that the answer is the fabricator first, because and the installer, because they're thinking down the road. The engineer isn't necessarily paid to figure out how it's going to be transported, how it's going to be lifted, how it's going to look, or, you know, how clean the paint is going to be. So from my perspective, the fabrication solution and the strategy comes first, and then you bounce it right off of the engineer. And if the engineer has any problems, they'll tell you, but they really appreciate that somebody's put, like Steve says, somebody's put some real thought into it ahead of time, because it makes their job ultimately easier.
Okay, great, thank you. So I have a question about budgets, and it's a numbers questions. So what size budgets were you working with for Water Guardians, the SFC bridge, and then Rite of Passage, the linear park? And how do you spread that budget around? How do you account for everything? And are these budgets developed collaboratively? Because we know that the budgets often will go down, they never go up.
That's a good one, David. Thank you for bringing that up. You know what? All of these had difficult budget points. They, in one case, they stayed the same. In one case, it went down, so that with the bridge. So Water Guardian stayed the same.
Yeah, the Water Guardian stayed the same.
The bridge went down, and Rite of Passage, the linear park, that just was just.
We took the art screen, which was part of the landscape.
That was just an unusual situation, and so we improvised on the budget. It was alarming going through the Rite of Passage file structure, just the computer files and all the communications, and like I thought I'd found the final technical drawing for the delta that Stefan had remarked on. There is always, the budget management, it's very difficult in all those situations because we are really trying to maximize value for the budget at the same time. So we're looking for what can be open form, what can be a repetitive shape, efficiencies in engineering. We, of late, like in those, we didn't swap out desired materials very much, but to anybody who's curious out there who's watching, with like a site condition can change, something can happen to a subcontractor. A subcontractor can be controlling an entire site, so there's no other bidding can be involved. So budget management is actually extremely important, and I think that we try to be very fair because we're wanting to produce the project as our goal. Like the goal is to make the project. It's not necessarily with the intention of doing another project in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, so I've got one more question from the audience, and then I think we're going to have to hand it over to Rebecca and Jan to round this out. But I think that this is the reality for people that do artwork in the public realm, is that, from the overall budget for a large project, the actual amount that goes to the art is generally quite small. And there's a lot riding on it and a lot of expectations. And you, as the contract holders, are responsible to making sure that your fabricators and their subs and everyone gets paid. So that puts you in a position of taking on quite a bit of risk to realize the project getting finished.
Municipalities and the greater public needs to recognize that the budgets are actually usually too small for the projects. And in the meantime, the artists, the fabricators, and all of the other partners and stakeholders are producing a knowledge economy. So there's custom fabrication, which applies to industrial design or architectural detailing, starts at having knowledge of fabrication in shops like Steve or Stefan's. But also our knowledge as artists, we're always acquiring skill and getting a greater sense of logistical knowledge and design ability. And then in the case of James, he's right here, but we'd say that it makes his firm more dynamic. Of course, they design buildings and dwelling spaces or institutional projects, but having an art side of things is also an R&D for an architecture firm. So it's a very large web, and there's a knowledge network around it. And if anything, we tend to stretch our budgets to all of our chagrin, and sometimes fabricators.
Yes. Great. Thank you. I've got one question here from the public, and it is, how would you characterize collaboration with immediately adjacent residential property owners in Burnaby?
Stefan.
I'd say real quick, in terms of the installation for the linear park in Burnaby, the public and the neighbors collaborated because before we started installing, we walked around the neighborhood and we knocked on doors and we introduced ourselves. And we asked them for favors. It was a very tight and difficult and sort of hairy job site. And we had a lot of giant pieces of metal that needed to get off of the truck and be stored directly in their neighborhood, be protected by them. We had to ask for their patience. We had to get them on side. And so they collaborated by giving us our front yards and giving us their garages and giving us coffees and coming out and talk to us and basically talking about the whole process and being part of it. So, I mean, for me, an interesting part of this whole conversation is, what is the actual involvement, the actual concrete involvement of the public in public art? Steve and I see what it is oftentimes because we're there when the neighbor is sitting there smoking and looking at us and saying, what the hell are you guys doing? What are you making? What is that thing? Why is it in my neighborhood? And that's where, for me, the public art really starts, that conversation right there. And when they see our faces and they may say, hey, this is art, this is, you know, this is something that's for your neighborhood, we get all sorts of responses, but you can't deny that it is a public process.
Thank you very much for that, Stefan. I think that's a fantastic closing statement on public art. I feel like we could go on for a couple more hours just talking about all of this. But unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I'm going to have to hand this back over to Rebecca. Thank you very much for this fantastic conversation.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for sharing the insights, amazing insights into your respective practices and the overlap of those as you work together in the various collaborative projects. It's interesting. There's so much to think about, and as you say, David, I think we could have kept this going for another hour. I am sorry to say I've been trying to manage the Q&A box as best I can, but there are some really good questions that we haven't gotten to just because the conversation has been so fruitful. So that's, you know, actually a really good problem to have. And Jan and I will figure out how to kind of get some of these answers out to the public. But just thinking about the inherently collaborative process of making art, because as you've all pointed out in your kind of closing remarks especially, it is not something that just happens you know, in an artist's studio by themselves, and ultimately it is going to be out in the public, and the public itself is this, which is this kind of massive unwieldy plurality, is essentially, you know, an essential collaborator in the final kind of meaning and context of the work. So it's really great to think about collaboration at all steps in the process. So before I hand it over to Jan for final remarks, I want to remind you to please mark your calendar for our future events. We have 7 more of these, same time and place, which is 1:30 p.m. Tuesdays, Eastern Standard Time. And our next session is titled A Civic Role for Artists. It's October 27th. And we have Carolyn Bowen, who's manager of the Watershed program at City of Calgary, the Artist in Residence program run out of their UEP department, and Shirley Levy, Chief of Staff for New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, who runs their Public Artist in Residence program, moderated by Toronto's photo laureate, Michelle Pearson-Clark. So Jan, would you like to give us our final closing remarks?
Sure, and yeah, thanks again, everyone. Just I learned so much, and also it's really encouraging to hear and how everybody values public arts, and I think that's what brings us all together here today. And also, just answer, and Rebecca mentioned, is there are so many great questions, and so I think starting from later this week, we will add 1 more section to our website, and so all the Q&As, if we're not able to answer you here, and we will coordinate with the presenters, and then we will add all the answers to the webpage. And also, just 1 more note is all the sessions are recorded and will made available online at the Summit website, and you can find the recording of Ken Lam's talk from last week there already. And if you like, you can subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletters, and we will inform you the new recordings are uploaded. And that's it for today's session. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day, and goodbye, everyone.